So, I finally saw Wicked. After many, many years of waiting, Wicked, the movie, has finally come to theaters. As a professional gay theater fan, I have loved Wicked since I was in middle school when my mom took me to see it on the stage, and we spent the next several months blasting the soundtrack in the car on the way to school, much to my brother's dismay. I also read the book, which, as a middle schooler, was a very confusing experience, because as you all have probably gleaned by now, the book and the musical are quite different. But the definite constant between the two is the very tangible romantic tension between the two main characters, Glinda and Elphaba, almost to the point where many viewers scarcely remember that Fiyero is even there. At least, if social media is any indication. The lesbian energy is too strong. For once.
We both wore Balenciaga hoodies.
That's right.
Mine was pink and said gay.
Fine, I'm gay.
Do ship Glinda and Elphaba as a couple.
Oh,
I
sure.
bet.
Let's get wickedly.
You ready, Elfie? Let's go. Ooh, when I meet the wizard, I'm gonna vogue so down. Yes. When I meet the wizard, he's gonna use my right pronouns. Yes.
Glinda might be a little in the closet, but if there were a time, maybe, you never know.
Yeah, you never know.
Give it a little more time.
Even like the chickens. Those
snow leopard
chickens
with
are
the little-
gay.
The marketing for the Wicked movie has altogether been very strange, especially when it comes to the way that Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande have been acting in interviews, but a major part of it is the fact that the actresses themselves very much recognize the romantic aspect of their characters' relationships, and Kristen Chenoweth herself, the original Wicked Glinda, has jumped on the gay Linda wagon as well. Nothing crazy here, but just recognizing the obvious. All of this has very little bearing on the original story of The Wizard of Oz. After all, Wicked, written by Gregory Maguire, is essentially Wizard of Oz fanfiction, as most things involving Oz actually are. Shockingly, I keep seeing people online who are unaware of this, and some who know Wicked but have never heard of The Wizard of Oz. Even the 1939 MGM movie is technically considered Oz fanfiction, or at least non-canonical by real Oz heads. The thing is, though, fanfic or not, Wicked's heavy queer themes are directly descended from arguably even more overt queer themes, characters, and storylines in the original Oz books written by L. Frank Baum at the turn of the century. The original Oz books, dubbed The Famous 40, are chock full of fairly obliquely written gay and trans characters, considering it was written in the Edwardian era. Come learn with me. But before we chat about how the Edwardian era handled gay themes, let's talk about navigating today's media landscape, which can make it incredibly challenging to fully grasp LGBTQ issues, especially when it can be difficult to understand the bias of the sources you read. Today's sponsor, Ground News, has changed the way that I've consumed news for months now. It's not only made my research easier, it's helped me cut through the chaos of today's absurd media landscape that has gotten much more complex following the election results. Built by a former NASA engineer, Ground News is an app and website that brings together articles from over 50,000 sources worldwide, so you can see how different outlets frame the same story. Plus, it gives you key insights like political bias, reliability, ownership, all backed by independent news watchdogs, and it's the kind of transparency we desperately need right now. Consuming news from only one or two news sources can create risky echo chambers, preventing you from seeing multiple angles of nuance. And just as bad, news articles will leave out vital details or even hastily publish unverified information, leading to the spread of dangerous misinformation. I mean, look at this story about the Ohio governor signing a bill limiting bathroom use by transgender students. It's covered by over 190 sources, and if I scroll down, I can see that the left-leaning source Pink News emphasizes the negative impact on the transgender community using terms like anti-trans and marginalizing, while the Daily Wire on the right frames it as a matter of ensuring alignment with biological sex, appealing to a viewpoint focused on enforcing traditional gender norms. This is especially dangerous now with LGBTQ stories, where mainstream media takes a reductive or misconstrued angle on a complex topic, or even refrains from reporting on important issues altogether. And if I wanted to dive deeper into this story, I can sort the articles by factuality, bias, and location to deepen my understanding. One of my favorite features that I found super helpful to use is the blind spot feed, which shows you news stories that have little to no reporting by one or another end of the political spectrum. It really helps me figure out what angles and voices that news sources are favoring, see who leaves out what information, and generally get a bigger picture from all of it. It used to take me so much time to try to do this labor all by myself, but Ground News has simplified it and does all of the work for me. By using Ground News, I can easily see the data and potential biases behind the news that I read and get multiple angles on a story so that I come away better informed and having saved myself a lot of time and grief. Staying informed and thinking critically about the news you consume is key to understanding the world around us. Right now is the best time to check out Ground News. They're having their biggest sale of the year for the Vantage plan, which gives you unlimited access to every feature. Go to ground.news/Casro for 50% off, which is less than $5 a month, whether it's for you or a gift to a loved one. It's time to get the bigger picture behind every story. Thank you so much to Ground News for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to learning about the gay history of Oz. Ooh, I hate this wig, but I'm wearing it for a reason. There's a reason I have short hair, and I hope it's not messing with my microphone.
Popular. The femme queen so popular. And yes, she got the green skin and she came to win. She gonna vote down. So let's tip, flick, wrist, spin, dip, and get that crown. Yes.
For nearly a century, the Land of Oz has been a central icon of the Western gay world. The Technicolor brightness, the celebration of everything unusual and over the top, the normality of the abnormal in Oz. The film, released by MGM in 1939, starring notable ally of the queer community Judy Garland, was every bit as campy and strange as a story like this could have been. So, of course, it was quickly adopted by the queer community as a hallmark representation of the essence of queer joy. I mean, it certainly tracks. Many people who grew up watching Oz when it played on TV correctly read into the campy modes of acting that the Friends of Dorothy had. The Scarecrow, Tin Man, and Cowardly Lion, played by Ray Bolger, Jack Haley, and Burt Lahr, respectively. These actors were not only well-versed in vaudevillian styles of physical comedy, but also the campiness of their characters that would clearly draw on the various queer archetypes that were popular in the 1930s. The Tin Man practically lisps and is prone to crying, and the Cowardly Lion wails about being a sissy, and later comes out of his Emerald City spa day with a perfect perm identical to Dorothy's. It's no wonder why Friend of Dorothy would later become slang for the gays. As Alexander Doty reminisces about his childhood as a gay man in My Beautiful Wickedness, The Wizard of Oz is Lesbian Fantasy, sometime in my 20s I became aware of butches and of camp, both of which fed into my developing gay appreciation for The Wizard of Oz. Camp finally let me make my peace with the Cowardly Lion. He was still over the top, but no longer a total embarrassment. Oh, I'd get a little nostalgic twinge of humiliation now and then, I still do, but by and large, I found him fabulously outrageous. King of the Forest? He was more like a drag queen who just didn't give a fuck. Because of this, he seemed to have a bravery the narrative insisted he lacked. Camp's appreciation of the excessive also led me to reevaluate Glinda. She wasn't just like a drag queen, she was one. Artifice surrounded her like that pink but of course, gossamer gown she wore. Who better to guide Dorothy along the road to straight womanhood, I thought. I saw this as a great ironic joke on all those straights who claimed the film as theirs. This reading of a queer Glinda, even in the 1939 film, is actually a lot more on the nose than a lot of people realize. After all, Billie Burke, who played Glinda, was likely bisexual. She was married to Florenz Ziegfeld Jr., the famous Broadway maestro responsible for the Ziegfeld Follies. Burke was a Ziegfeld girl and was wedded to the guy until he died of pleurisy in 1932, but Ziegfeld had a number of affairs, and Burke sought out other modes of company. She allegedly had a romantic fling with Katharine Hepburn, and then a more well-known one with lesbian director Dorothy Arzner, who coincidentally also dated Katharine Hepburn. The Burke-Arzner relationship was literally happening around the time of the production of Wizard of Oz, so yes, a queer reading of this Glinda is not too far off. Doty continues, "There's more than a touch of camp excess here that finally seems expressive of lesbian feminists rather than of the straight feminine. And let's not forget that while Glinda may look like a fairy godmother, she is a witch, and therefore is connected to the Wicked Witch and to centuries-long Western cultural associations between witchcraft and lesbianism. But all of this didn't start with the 1939 film, which I have discussed at length in my video on the production of the film. The queerness of Oz goes way back to its very beginnings as a series of children's fairy tale books by author L. Frank Baum. So let's travel there, to where Oz was born. Lyman Frank Baum was born May 15, 1856, around Syracuse, New York, to a well-to-do family of 7 children. His childhood was that of unease and ill health despite his wealth. He had a bad heart and was mostly homeschooled. Although I suppose the wealth paid off for something, because his supportive father bought little Lyman his very own printing press after the boy showed interest in writing. He also was greatly interested in the theater, a thing that would be very obvious in the Oz books, and he also began his long tradition of using random pseudonyms. More on that in a bit. In 1882, Baum married his feminist wife, Maud Gage, and together they had 4 kids and moved to South Dakota, of all places. And clearly South Dakota sucked as much then as it does today, so the family made the wise decision to move to Chicago, Illinois. It was here that Baum truly began his publishing career in the late 1890s, which was fortuitous. This era in Chicago saw a huge boom in publishers in the city, and there was much work to be found. Coincidentally, Baum was here at the same time as the Leyendecker family, and J.C. and Frank Leyendecker got their starts working as commercial and book illustrators in Chicago after attending the Art Institute of Chicago, my own alma mater. The brothers had their studio here at the Chicago Fine Arts Building, where they ran an artist salon on the 10th floor. You can still see Frank Leyendecker's mural here. I say all this not just because the Leyendeckers are my gay blorbos, but because on this very same floor down the hall is the former studio of William Denslow, the illustrator for the Wizard of Oz books. He worked here around the same time as the Leyendecker brothers and very possibly illustrated the Oz books right here. Seriously, if you're in Chicago, you definitely should visit the Fine Arts Building. It's gorgeous and has a fun bookshop, a theater, and has one of the last remaining manually operated elevators in the US. Under the name L. Frank Baum, because he wasn't very fond of the name Lyman, he published The Wonderful Wizard of Oz in 1900, and so Baum became one of the most prominent authors of the early 1900s. And he crafts something else incredibly interesting too. Baum went on to publish dozens of other books under various pseudonyms, many being female personas. This certainly is unusual for a male author to do, especially in this time period. Usually it was the other way around. Women often needed to publish with male pseudonyms because publishers weren't interested in works by women. So what use did Baum have for reinventing himself as a woman numerous times? Suzanne Metcalf, Laura Bancroft, and Edith Van Dyne were in reality all just L. Frank Baum. Tison Pugh points out that the various personas were functional as covering various facets of the kids' books market. One wrote for younger co-ed audiences, others wrote for only girls, and then some of the male pseudonyms wrote for only boys. And each pseudonym was like a different persona. The other issue he used these personas for was because he had such a massive and rapid output of books, and publishers were concerned that parents wouldn't want to buy too many books by the same author. And the other, more subtle reason Baum used female pseudonyms was because, in an era with unique and strict gender roles, they allowed him to explore writing styles and themes outside of the bounds of being simply a male author. Similarly to the themes within Oz, Baum himself as the author, or as he calls himself in the books, the Royal Historian of Oz, Baum was able to twist and play with identity, his own identity, in a world of his own creation. It's not really fair to speculate on whether or not Baum had experienced gender dysphoria or something like that, because we'll never know, but it's undeniable that he was interested in pushing the boundaries of gender, as became very apparent in the Oz books themselves. The books, of course, were written in Humboldt Park, Chicago, where today there is a cute little memorial and a yellow brick road commemorating the birthplace of Oz. To the northeast, in Lincoln Park, there's even an Oz Park with some really bad to look at statues of Dorothy and her friends. It makes sense why Oz was born here, given that the books themselves are chock full of Chicago inspiration. Most notably being that shortly after the Baum family moved here, they got to experience the 1894 World's Columbian Exposition down in Hyde Park, where for the very first time, visitors to the fair had the opportunity to see a bright artificial city illuminated with electric light, a true introduction to a magical future. Baum took the imagery of the electrified white city and created the Emerald City, which hilariously in the books wasn't actually green. The wizard, of course, being a scammer, forced the people of Oz to wear green lensed glasses so that the Emerald City looks green and they don't have to actually make it green. So he created the Emerald City and other things he saw at the fair, like the various demonstrations, performances, and new inventions would inspire the unusual creatures, characters, and objects in Oz. Needless to say, Chicago is very proud to have given Oz to the world. Baum made one failed attempt to end the Oz books in 1910 with the Emerald City of Oz, but then succumbed to the outrage of his own readers and continued publishing more Oz books until Glinda of Oz in 1920. L. Frank Baum passed away in 1919, and his work has been immortal ever since, much like the people of Oz. In large part due to the fact that in a ton of ways, Oz is truly a queer utopia. It's not super surprising that Oz was generally progressive in many ways. Baum's wife was, as I said earlier, a feminist and also the daughter of a very famous feminist. Baum hoped for his work to present children with a very modern and forward-thinking world in which women held equal power, if not more, and had equal roles as men did in politics and industry. Now, I do need to clarify the nuance here. Baum was not a perfect guy. In fact, he had some very glaring issues, notably the racism. Hilariously, Baum's work appears rather anti-racist in a huge number of instances. In one, for instance, a character named Trot encounters an octopus and says, "Why, everybody knows that octopuses are just wicked and deceitful. Up on the earth where I live, they call the Standard Oil Company an octopus, and the Coal Trust an octopus." To which the insulted octopus replies, "Just because we have several long arms and take whatever we can reach, they accuse us of being oh, I cannot say it. It's too shameful, too humiliating." Unfortunately, rather than being actually anti-racist pleas here, this is better an example of Baum's hatred of exploitative corporations, referencing the sometimes definitely racist imagery of the octopus in political cartoons that were popular at the time. Baum's famous writings are littered with almost comically bad representations of Native Americans, and his book Daughters of Destiny is basically one big anti-Semitic carnival of awful Jewish stereotypes and mean-spirited jokes. The Oz books are not immune to this. It's a pretty steady constant that characters in Oz have a very stark view of other races, nevertheless fantastical ones, as being inherently good or evil. Some Oz races are obvious caricatures of African peoples, like the Tottenhots. Even the Candy people of Maryland are not immune to racism. One character says, "One of our greatest troubles is that we cannot depend on our colored servants, who are chocolate. Chocolate can seldom be depended on, you know." Needless to say, you would not be hard-pressed to find the N-word sprinkled around Baum's works, which is, sadly, fairly typical of writings in this era, even in children's literature. It's extremely frustrating to have stories as beloved as Oz be tainted by such things, but the inherent racism was never not going to be there, especially in a fictional world like Oz, where fantasy races are so divided by stark ideas of who is good and who is evil. Written by a white man. If Baum's work was openly influenced by his contemporary ideas involving race, they were equally influenced by emerging politics surrounding sex and queerness. After all, Baum wrote The Wonderful Wizard of Oz in an era when the fairly new field of sexology was just emerging, and there was an immense public interest in queerness like never before. Baum had no qualms including feminism, critique of industrialism, and other current events, and yes, race issues in his work. So obviously, queerness was not exempt. I've already covered in much greater detail the politics and history of queerness in children's literature in this video, so go check that out for an in-depth look at that. But as for Oz, just how queer was it, really? Well, it turns out more than you think. A lot of people writing about this sort of thing really like to point out that queer appears to be Baum's favorite word, which, yeah, he uses it real generously, I'll give him that. I won't focus on that too much because honestly in that time period, the word queer was used synonymously with strange pretty much everywhere. Though, to be fair, it was also starting to be increasingly used as a sort of term to describe a very specific sort of gay man, but that use of queer wouldn't have been read into by most of the general public, so there's not much to unpack there, really. Baum just really wanted you to know that everything in Oz was super weird. But the fact that Oz moves past simply having the strange and eccentric and moves straight into full acceptance and celebration of things outside the norm inherently invites a genuinely queer-friendly world. In one incident in The Marvelous Land of Oz, the character Jack Pumpkinhead laments his silly-looking body, to which the Scarecrow replies, "That proves you are unusual, and I am convinced that the only people worthy of consideration in this world are the unusual ones, for the common folks are like the leaves of a tree, and live and die unnoticed." And in TikTok of Oz, yeah, there's a character named TikTok, spelled like the app. Baum was, ahead of his time. The Shaggy Man goes even further, seemingly encouraging folks who have unconventional desires. "I think our longings are natural, and if we act as nature prompts us, we can't go far wrong." Another very significant theme that Tison Pugh points out is the fact that the Oz books essentially and repeatedly queer the hero's journey, where the traditional hero's journey usually involves the lone male hero departing home and finding himself forever changed after his quest, is unable to truly return home. Most of the Oz books involve either Dorothy or another woman as the legendary chosen hero, and usually instead of departing their friends when the adventure is done, the groups tend to stick together or otherwise reunite, and are always making their way back home, wherever home is. Speaking of prominent women, we have to talk about Princess Ozma, who I am dressed as today to answer probably your questions if you didn't already know who this was. Let's start at the beginning. In The Marvelous Land of Oz, the book directly following The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, a young boy named Tip is raised by the evil witch Mombi and manages to escape her with the help of the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and a creature of Tip's own creation named Jack Pumpkinhead. It's revealed that Tip is, in reality, Princess Ozma, the true ruler of the Emerald City. Although, not till the end of the book. Ozma was given to Mombi as an infant by the wizard when that old rascal took the throne from her father, King Pastoria, which, oh my god. Basically, the wizard appeared in Oz from the sky in his hot air balloon, and like the snake oil salesman carnival quack that he is, instantly claimed to the people of Oz that he is a magical wizard, and the Ozians were like, "Okay, we believe you." And then the wizard said that he could rid Oz of all the wicked witches if the people obey his every command, and they were like, "Okay, we believe you." Thus, King Pastoria abdicated the throne, and the Emerald City and the Yellow Brick Road were built, and because Pastoria had simply fled and left his infant daughter behind, the wizard was able to kidnap her and leave her in Mombi's care. And so, Mombi transformed Ozma into a boy named Tip, who would be her servant. Eventually, Glinda shows up and forces Mombi to return Ozma to her true form by threatening to kill her. At first, Tip is apprehensive about becoming a girl, but he eventually accepts the transition and is transformed back into Ozma. Ozma is an extremely significant character in Oz, as she is not only its rightful ruler, but she has also got godlike powers due to the fact that her mother is a fairy goddess, Queen Lurline. She is very clearly an example of an early trans woman in fiction, a thing that Baum was able to get away with due to the fact that this is kids' literature, which gets away with a lot of queer themes undetected, and the fact that Oz is already established as a land where many unheard of things are possible. It inherently puts the readers into a headspace to accept things they normally might not. And the transness of various characters, not just Ozma, is not only a fact of life in Oz, but accepted and celebrated, as is any other queer thing. Because nothing in Oz is actually a fixed state. Everything seems to be fluid, everything is transformable. In the Emerald City of Oz, one of the nefarious phantasms, quote, slowly raised his arms, and in a twinkling his hairy skin fell from him, and he appeared before the astonished gnome as a beautiful woman, clothed in a flowing gown of pink gauze. Significantly, the post-transition women of Oz are never played for laughs, and unlike many other fictional depictions of trans women as mean-spirited caricatures, they are always described as being outstandingly and almost mythically beautiful. Ozma, for example, is described as being very fresh, healthy, and extremely beautiful as the dew from a spring May morning. Her lovely eyes sparkled like 2 large emeralds, and her glossy pink lips tinted like a tourmaline. All down her back floated tresses of ruddy gold locks, with a slender solid gold circlet was entrusted with jewels, confining them at the brow. 2 lovely blossoms were adorned on each side of her head, and her elegant robes of silken green gauze floated around her like a cloud, and dainty satin slippers shod her little feet. This description of Ozma, being the first description we ever get of her after her transition, was the blueprint for her depiction in the Disney sequel to The Wizard of Oz, Return to Oz, which was scary to watch. I watched for the first time fairly recently. But in the original book, she's depicted with dark hair and white flowing outfits, closer to what I'm wearing right now. Oz isn't even the only series that Baum wrote that involves a woman-man-woman trans character. The Enchanted Island of You has the character Prince Marvel, whose true form is an ancient fairy woman. And the stories are keen to make it clear that the transness of these characters has no effect on them as people or necessarily their personalities. When Ozma returns to her female form, she says, "I hope none of you will care less for me than you did before. I'm just the same tip, you know. Only, to which Jack Pumpkinhead interjects, only you're different." As for the gays, this is a really interesting thing that Baum does where he almost deliberately heterobaits the reader and then flagrantly ignores any possibility of a straight couple happening. Heterosexuality seems to not even exist in Oz. It doesn't seem necessary for procreation. People and creatures in Oz are all given life through magic all the time, and the powers of Ozma and Queen Lurline have made the beings of Oz immortal and unchanging. Even Dorothy is affected by Oz's magic and ceases aging when she moves there to live with Ozma. Sometimes a male and female character will have a momentary flirtation, like between the Scarecrow and Scraps, the Patchwork Girl, but then it never goes further than that. Or a narrative will get set up where a heroic young man encounters a lovely young girl, and you're like, oh, this is the fairy tale structure, they'll fall in love and get married, and then the story completely ignores that could even be a possibility. Meanwhile, the Tin Man and the Scarecrow are fagging it up over there, constantly. As Baum himself writes, "There lived in the land of Oz 2 queerly made men who were the best of friends. They were so much happier when together that they were seldom apart." These 2 are proactively the gayest characters in the whole series besides Dorothy and Ozma, and even Glinda. At the end of the marvelous land of Oz, the Scarecrow declares, "I shall return with my friend the Tin Woodman. We've decided never to be parted in the future." But Kaz, you may be saying, the Tin Woodman had a fiancé. And to that I say, where is she? Huh? Where's his fiancé? Because Baum gave him a fiancé and then conveniently made her completely unattainable. In a fairly brutal way, too. The story went that when the Tin Man was a human, he was a guy named Nick Chopper, and he was engaged to a girl who worked for a witch. To avoid losing the girl as a worker, the witch cursed Nick's axe to cut off his body parts. As each body part was cut, a tinsmith replaced them with tin prosthetics until he was, as the Tin Man says, all tin and no meat. Later in the series, when the Tin Man remembers his fiancée and people tell him to seek her out, he declares that he doesn't want to find her and no longer has the capability to love her. He views finding her as an obligatory duty rather than an actual desire. And in a rather morbid ending, it turns out that he wouldn't be able to marry this girl out of obligation anyway, for she's already married to a homunculus? Frankenstein's monster sort of thing. Turns out that the tinsmith who made the Tin Man took his old meat body parts and glued them together along with the body parts of a different Tin Man to make a full man named Chopfit, if that's how you pronounce his name. I don't know. Not sure why he couldn't just use the magic glue to put Nick's body parts back on him originally, rather than making him into a Tin Man, but whatever. Oz really seems like a horror series most of the time, doesn't it? As Tison Pugh writes in Queer Oz, which was one of my biggest sources for this video, definitely give it a read. If the ending of And They Lived Happily Ever After, with its post-narrative promise of marital bliss and foreshadowing of bouncing babies adored by doting parents, defines the heteronormative valence of fairy tale as a genre, the Oz books cannot easily be construed as replicating the sexually and ideologically normative dynamics of such texts. By employing queer-friendly themes and upsetting traditional gender roles in its construction of a fairyland utopia, and by reimagining the necessity of heterosexuality and reproduction within its antisocial critique of normativity, the oddness of the Oz books queers the ideological and sexual foundations of fairy tale and myth. What actually first stood out to me in all of this, though, was the relationship between Dorothy and Ozma. In one of the books, Dorothy says that Ozma made her a princess of Oz and has been begging her to go live with her in the Emerald City. Dorothy is the only one allowed in Ozma's private chambers, and they greet each other with kisses and intimate embraces. Ozma refers to Dorothy as her chosen companion, which even in this time period was often a quiet way of saying partner for gay people. In The Road to Oz, Baum writes, "Everything about Ozma attracted one, and she inspired love in the sweetest affection rather than awe or ordinary admiration. Dorothy threw her arms around her little friend and hugged and kissed her rapturously, and Toto barked joyfully, and Button-Bright smiled a happy smile and consented to sit on the soft cushions close beside the princess." It's made very clear over the course of the series that both Dorothy and Ozma have no interest in a heterosexual romance, and not just because both of them are very young and unaging. They only desire to be romantic with each other, making them one of the only canonical couples in Oz, aside from the Tin Man and the Scarecrow. And then there's Glinda herself, who lives in her castle with a literal harem of the most beautiful women in Oz. Of course, the development in Dorothy's romantic life only comes about later in the books after Ozma is introduced, but her journey in the first story, The Wizard of Oz, both in the book and the 1939 film, are reflective of a queer experience of navigating and having to come to peace with living in two very different worlds. As Robert Hopke writes in Dorothy and Her Friends, Symbols of Gay Male Individuality in The Wizard of Oz, for gay men, the persona themes in the movie The Wizard of Oz are intimately connected to the film's other mythic theme, the relationship between masculinity and femininity. By coming to terms with Oz and finding her way home again, Dorothy succeeds in finding a standpoint of self in a world where nothing is what it seems, and everyone has two faces. By reconciling the opposites of masculinity and femininity, by finding her true individual self, Dorothy provides more for gay people than a simple representation of an inner psychological process. Of course, this doesn't just apply to gay men, but all LGBT people. And I could say that Wicked, both the book and the musical adaptation, are exactly the same way. You may have noticed in the last month or so that, well, Ariana Grande is a huge himejoshi. Like, she is on the Wicked Yuri train so intensely. Can't say I'm really surprised. I mean, she's been a fan of Wicked for years, and odds are, if you're in the Wicked fandom, you're probably a Gelfie truther. Like, sure, the canon fact is that Fiyero and Elphaba get together, but even the author Gregory Maguire actually intended for Gelfie to be canon and clearly wrote it that way, even if he tiptoes around the fact in interviews. After all, Maguire himself is a gay man, and has been out about that fact for decades. He has openly said many times that he does view Elphaba's son Lear as a gay character. The Wicked verse does have several gay and bi side characters that are clearly written that way. And when it comes to Glinda and Elphaba, it's a little more complex. For one thing, it's implied that Elphaba is intersex in the book. Literally on the first page, Elphaba overhears the Cowardly Lion and the Tin Man repeating transvestigator gossip about her. It reads, "What a witch, psychologically warped, possessed by demons, insane, not a pretty picture." "She was castrated at birth," replied the Tin Woodman calmly. "She was born hermaphroditic, or maybe entirely male." "Oh, you see castration wherever you look," said the lion. The book goes on to mention how the midwives at Elphaba's birth couldn't agree on her sex, but another notable thing happens in the opening scene that I just mentioned. The Scarecrow, who is later revealed is actually Fiyero, declares, "She's a woman who prefers the company of other women." Actually, in the Wicked books, it's left ambiguous whether or not Fiyero and the Scarecrow are actually the same character, so Who's to say? Given that the gossip about Elphaba being intersex is technically textually true, it stands to reason that this is true too. Especially if you read the book and see all the, glaring clues laid throughout. The people of Oz whisper that Glinda's husband was a marriage of convenience, or just a cover for her lesbian leanings. Gregory Maguire himself said in an interview with Matthew Rodriguez, "For them, I wanted Oz to have a depth of culture, a depth of history, and a depth of complexity, of experience that was more analogous to the world in which we live. And that meant it had to have varieties of sexual experience. The kiss between Elphaba and Glinda in the book was intentional, and it was modest and restrained and refined in such a way that one could imagine that one of those two young women had felt more than the other and had not wanted to say it. Or perhaps, because a novelist can't write every scene, perhaps when the lights were out and the novelist was out having a smoke in the back alley, the girls had sex in the bed on the way to the Emerald City." The kiss he's referring to is in Chapter 2, Part 3, Section 8, after Elphaba and Glinda's meeting with the wizard, when Elphaba decides to leave in what in the musical becomes the Defying Gravity scene. He put her face against Glinda's and kissed her. "Hold out if you can," she murmured, and kissed her again. "Hold out, my sweet." And on the train to the Emerald City in the beginning of that same chapter, they share a bed. Although it doesn't say that they actually had sex, but that's Maguire's point. Just because it doesn't say that they didn't, doesn't mean that they didn't. As an author, he personally sort of views himself similarly to L. Frank Baum. Not as a creator, but as a historian of Oz. He wants to leave space for the reality of the characters having lives and moments in between and outside of the words on the page. He put the pieces there intentionally to be picked up on. And if you pick up on literally everything in the book, musical and movie, Elphaba, Glinda, and Fiyero are all at the very least wildly bisexual. Every scene with Fiyero involves him being fawned over by characters of all genders in the movie, a tension that he openly does not shy away from. Given that Fiyero's actor, Jonathan Bailey, is openly gay, that certainly helps.
Well, I think Fiyero is canonically bisexual, but I feel like, well, Fiyero just is so dashing and everybody loves him, but it's because he kind of leans into these narcissistic qualities, or these seemingly narcissistic qualities about him.
It struck me last night watching the film, I'm Not That Girl is such a queer anthem, isn't it? I mean, the thing is, the themes in this resonate with everyone, but that thing of being born into a world that tells you that you're not worth anything, or that you're unlovable, and to harness that and to know that actually that will and is your superpower. And it's about the people you meet along the way and the relationship that you forge, which helps you strengthen that. And yeah, I hope all queer kids can see this story and know that things are going to be okay.
And of course, Cynthia Erivo is sapphic too. And it needs to be noted that the musical and the book are very different from each other. The original stage musical, which debuted in 2003, was vastly less gay than the book is, because it was, Broadway in 2003. Although Idina Menzel and Kristen Chenoweth, the original actresses, certainly did manage to portray the roles really gaily nonetheless, but over the years, the various actresses who have played Elphaba and Glinda have put their own twists on the characters, slowly incorporating more and more sapphic romance and subtext, culminating in the 2024 Wicked film, which is definitely very much playing into the gay subtext of the whole story. Is it like totally overtly lesy now? No, not really. But in my opinion, there's nothing wrong with that. Actually, characters don't need to be like sucking face or whatever for the queerness to be tangible. And it's clear that Ariana and Cynthia are playing these roles with the sapphic tension in mind, while also fully understanding their characters' nuances. As Ariana said, Glinda is probably really in the closet and very repressed, and then Kristen Chenoweth publicly agreed with her. There's no reality in Wicked where a character as, let's be honest here, selfish and ignorant as Glinda drops everything in her very privileged and comfortable life and runs off with Elphaba against everything she's ever known. Glinda realizes the cost of her choices far too late, as we'll see in part 2. And Elphaba, abandoned by everyone else, but especially the woman she loves the most, of course she ends up with Fiyero, And she does love him too. As Doris Robb writes in From Book to Broadway, though the musical could be considered unconventional or subversive due to the queer love story, in the context of the original text, which seeks to explode traditional gender binaries, the depiction of Elphaba and her immersion in the hegemony ultimately undermines the queer undertones in favor of firmly structured gender binaries. The novel presents in her a sort of ungendered being, or perhaps a third gender, that upsets the traditional male-female binary. As much as the queer subtext is still there in the musical, the fact is, the Wicked musical is very much resistant to subversion that the book presented, dampening the prominent sexual energy between Glinda and Elphaba by funneling the sexuality through Fiyero. Even the sex scene between Fiyero and Elphaba in the book is notably kind of desexualized and made unusual by its focus on Elphaba's intersexuality. In its fear of audience backlash, we have to accept that early 2000s Broadway did water the story down, but even the watering down couldn't actually override how queer the story still is. Hi, Mila. Hi. What? And Fiyero is still largely ignored by fans in favor of focusing on making Gelfie les out. But here's the good news for everyone unhappy with how things go in Wicked. Wicked the musical is basically fanfiction of the Wicked book, which is fanfiction of the 1939 movie, The Wizard of Oz, which is fanfiction of the original Baum books. It's all derivative. So what that means is, your headcanons about the world of Oz, and I guess even Wicked, are just as real and valid as Gregory Maguire's or Stephen Schwartz's or MGM's. As Gregory Maguire continues, when Stephen Schwartz came to me, I said, "If I'm going to trust you to do this, I'm going to trust you all the way. I will not ask for a veto, I will not ask to see the scripts, I will not ask to be involved in the production. I did not want to be distracted by whatever arguments might arise from collaborative work. I also wanted to honor the ambition and strength and talent and vision of other artists and not interfere with them, in the same way I didn't feel that L. Frank Baum had come out of his grave and interfered with me. And I thought that was only honorable to say, as long as you have proven to me you know why I wrote this book, then go ahead." What was that? And it will not be the story of the novel, but that's okay. If you carry out the bones of my intentions, and people leave the theater thinking about what I want them to think about when they close the back cover of the book, then we're good. Go ahead. And I'm very glad I made that decision. Queerness is a core backbone of the Oz world, and always has been. Wicked is just one more piece of the ever-evolving puzzle, and people will continue reimagining the world of Oz over and over because it has always invited us to think within a space where anything is possible and the strange and unusual are facts of life. It'll be interesting to see where this world of fairies goes next. Thank you for learning with me about all the queerness in the Ozverse. Let me know in the comments if you've seen the Wicked movie, and what you thought about it. And also, don't forget to grab a copy of my graphic novel, Liberated, The Radical Art and Life of Claude Cahun. And until next time, wash thy hands, wear thy mask, and I'll see you somewhere over the rainbow.